evening, I want to once again welcome you to our study of the Bible, the Word in a Year. This evening, we're continuing to look at the final books of the Old Testament, the books that are commonly referred to as the books of the minor prophets. Last week, we talked about how they're commonly referred to as also the book of the 12 in the Hebrew Bible. And the number 12, it signifies the number of prophets in this book. Well, this week, we'll be looking at two more of these prophetic writings. We'll be looking at the book of Amos, and then also the book of Obadiah. The book of Amos, it's attributed to the prophet Amos. And Amos, he was a shepherd and also a fig farmer. And he lived at the border of northern and southern Israel, those two kingdoms. And it was written during the period of Jeroboam II, a king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Jeroboam II, he was widely viewed as a successful ruler from the outside perspective, from the world's perspective, maybe even from the nation's perspective. He had won many battles. He gained new wealth for the kingdom, but in the eyes of the prophets, he was probably one of the worst kings ever. His wealth, it led to social apathy, and he allowed idol worship of the Canaanite gods, which also then led to injustice and neglect of the poor. And it all came to a head for Amos, and he just couldn't take it anymore. So he sensed the calling of God to travel north to Bethel, which was an important city in the northern kingdom. And he went there to announce God's word to his people. The book of Amos, it's a collection of sermons, poems, and visions that Amos proclaimed over the years, and which were later compiled to give God's people a sense of his message to the northern kingdom. And this message, it bears repeating to this day still. This book is broken up into three parts. The first part are a series of messages to Israel and the other nations. The second part, it's a collection of poems that express Amos's message to the people of Israel and its leaders. Finally, the third part, it contains a series of visions in which Amos experienced, and they depict God's judgment on Israel. The big picture of this book is Amos' call to embrace the true worship of God that should always include acts of justice, righteousness, and love of one's neighbor. The first part, chapters 1 and 2, they're accusations against Israel and the nations. This book, it opens with a series of short poems that accuse all of Israel's neighbors of violence and also injustice. And at first this seems odd, considering Amos is supposed to be speaking against Israel according to the opening verse of the chapter. Well, the thing is, Amos, he begins with the nations that are surrounding Israel. And as Amos speaks against the neighbors of Israel, he sort of draws a circle with Israel at the center. And when Amos finally arrives at Israel, his condemnation on them is 3 times longer and also more intense than any of the others. He specifically accuses the wealthy of Israel of having allowed grave social injustices to occur, specifically for allowing the poor to be sold into slavery for debts and not allowing them legal representation. And this comes back to the idea that God desires justice in the world. It's a common theme of the prophets in which they speak out against the injustices that are occurring in Israel. The second part of this book, chapters 3 through 6, it exposes Israel's hypocrisy and also injustice as well. We just talked about how Amos had decried them for injustice, and he continues to double down on the nation by bringing against them the accusations of their hypocrisy and also injustice of all the nations on earth. God had chosen them to be a blessing to all, yet in spite of their blessings, they turned away from him. God says that he will punish them for their sin. You see, with great calling came great responsibility, and Israel's rebellion had great consequences. And in this section, Amos has several poems, all of which you can see a few key themes that are repeated. First, he accuses the wealthy and the religious leaders of the nation for being hypocritical. They faithfully attend religious gatherings, and they give offerings to God, yet they neglect the poor and they ignore injustice. Their worship for God, it's completely disconnected to how they treat people, to how they live their life. You see, true relationship with God, it will transform individuals. Second, Amos accuses Israel of repeated idolatry, which is connected to the previous theme of worship and justice. The northern kingdom, they had built their own temple when they broke away from the southern kingdom, when they broke away from Judah. And since then, the northern kingdom of Israel had only accumulated more and more idols representing a whole host of things: sex, war, weather. And it was in their idolatry that they lacked justice and they refused to spread generosity. True worship of God, it's synonymous with doing good and spreading generosity and justice. The final theme is that because Israel and its king have rejected Amos and the other prophets, God will send the day of the Lord as a great and terrible act of justice on Israel. Specifically, Amos predicts that a powerful nation will conquer and destroy the nation of Israel and take them away into exile. And this happens almost 40 years after this prophecy, when the Assyrian Empire, they invade the northern kingdom. The final part, chapters 7 through 9, are visions of the day of the Lord. Amos's visions, they're symbolic of a day of the Lord coming to the northern kingdom of Israel. He sees Israel being devastated by locusts and a scorching fire. He sees God violently striking at the pillars of Israel's great idol temple at Bethel. And the building he sees crumbling down. These are images of God's justice on the leaders and the gods of Israel that they had chosen. And there's a final glimmer of hope at the end of this book. Amos sees out of the ruins of a destroyed building, which represents Israel, comes one who will restore the house of David. Amos sees God bringing a future messianic king from David's line to rebuild the family of his people, including the other nations. All of the devastation will be reversed one day. And this final part is important because in spite of all of the judgment that God brought upon Israel because of their rebellion, his long-term purposes are for restoration and for creating a new family. Amos's call was to embrace true worship of God, which should always lead to justice, righteousness, and loving one's neighbor. The second book that we're going to talk about this evening is the book of Obadiah. And Obadiah is the shortest book in the Old Testament. It's a mere 21 verses in length. But there's a lot there to unpack in those short 21 verses or so. This book, it's a series of judgment poems against the ancient nation of Edom, a country that neighbored Israel on the other side of the Dead Sea. The Edomites, they shared a common ancestry with Israel. They both belonged to the family of Abraham. They were actually descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, also known as Israel. But despite their family ties, throughout the years, there were tensions between Israel and Edom. And during the tragic fall of Jerusalem to Babylon, when Israel was invaded, Edom took advantage of the situation by plundering their cities, capturing and even killing some captives. So in this book, Obadiah holds Edom accountable for their violence. And the big picture out of this book is that pride and betrayal become an example of our human condition and ways in which people betray one another and harm God's good world. Eventually, God will deal with evil, and he'll bring all the nations into his kingdom of peace. Verse 1 through 14 of Obadiah, it speaks against the leaders of Edom. He begins by addressing the people at the top. In the first section of this book, Obadiah speaks against the leaders of Edom for their pride, for their self-exaltation. This pride is what led them to sit by idly when Babylon came to destroy Jerusalem. And it's also what led them to participate and to join in with the destruction of Judah. God says that Edom will be brought down from their heights and destroyed as well. Verse 15 through 21 of Obadiah. In there, Obadiah, he declares that all nations that act like Edom, they will face the day of the Lord. Those nations too will fall from their heights. They will fall from where they view themselves in these lofty positions. So Obadiah, he sees Edom's pride and fall as an example of how God will one day confront the pride of all nations and bring about their fall. And as with all the books of the prophets, there's hope that's offered at the end of it. After the day of the Lord, Obadiah speaks about the hope of God's kingdom over all nations. God will restore his kingdom over the New Jerusalem. And he'll also repopulate with a faithful remnant. This small book of Obadiah contributes to the larger portrait of God's justice and his faithfulness. The downfall of pride and arrogance will point to the day when God will deal with evil in our world, and the day in which he will bring his kingdom of peace over all the nations. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next session.